you might be overwhelmed by all the different ways you should be gardening. And I'm here to say, you can just do this if you want. You can just throw stuff all over the place. That's what I did in this back garden here, and look at it. I've got broccoli, beans, root crops, flowers coming like crazy. So in this video, we're gonna go over to North Carolina, hang out with Meg to introduce the concept of chaos gardening.
In my first couple of years of gardening, I had a pretty demanding full-time job with a 1-hour commute there and a 1-hour commute back. So needless to say, I did not have a lot of time to garden, but I still really wanted a garden. And I remember coming out here in early spring, just looking around, feeling defeated, thinking I'm not gonna be able to have a garden this year. And then it's like a little light bulb went off in my head. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna try something. Chaos gardening can mean something different to everyone, but to me, it just means getting back to the basics and gardening how nature gardens. Nature is the best gardener, and she's very chaotic with it. She's not sowing her seeds every 6 to 8 inches in neat little rows, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that if that's your style. But if you're a little bit chaotic and disorganized yourself, like I am, you might enjoy this more wild, freestyle approach to gardening. I also like to think of chaos gardening as instinctive gardening, because humans have been gardening for thousands and thousands of years, and I think that we all have this little instinct inside of us that makes us capable of growing our own food. And like back before the days of the internet and Google, people couldn't just go and Google how to garden. They had to just go outside, they had to sow seeds, they had to figure it out by doing and observing. And I think that that is what we're trying to emulate with chaos gardening. If you're ready to give it a try, I'm going to share with you some guidelines that I have learned over the years. And later on, I'll share with you 5 chaos recipes straight from my garden to get you started. The first rule to chaos gardening is that there are no rules, only vibes. This is your garden, and this is all about experimenting, so you get to call the shots. But here are just some rough guidelines that I've learned throughout the years to give you a little bit of a leg up. A good principle to keep in mind when you are doing any type of gardening is that plants really just need 3 things in order to thrive. They need good sun, water, and good soil. And I would argue that good soil is the most important out of those 3, even when we're talking about chaos gardening. Although it's not a rule, again, there are no rules, because I have grown many things in my dense clay North Carolina soil that should not have grown well there. I prefer to grow in raised beds, and I just want to make sure that my soil is like loose, fluffy, it's rich. And if you don't have such good soil, there's a couple of things that you can do. One thing you can do is to pick up a soil test kit and just test your soil out. Another thing, which is just good practice overall, whether you have good soil or not, is to amend with some nice compost before planting. Compost is really nutrient dense and plants love it. Another thing to keep in mind is that some plants are gonna love the chaos more than others. And I think that the best plants to chaos garden with are gonna be your quick growing plants that can be planted densely together and that have smaller seeds. So when someone asks me what should I start chaos gardening with, I always suggest lettuce. Lettuce is so easy to grow. It has very small seeds that can pretty much just be surface sown. I really don't ever worry about even putting dirt on them. I just sprinkle them and I forget about them. Boom, lettuce. They can be planted very densely together if it's a leafy variety instead of a heading variety. It's just a really fun plant to chaos garden with. Some others that work really well are carrots. I always call my carrots chaos carrots. Radish, beets, and herbs really love chaos gardening as well. And those are going to do a lot better than some larger plants that have much larger seeds, like, sunflowers. I know tomatoes don't have large seeds, but they are very large plants. So your tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, anything that grows very large and wide is going to require just a little bit more preparation on your part. But there is a world where these can collide, and I will show you some examples of that when I'm showing you my chaos recipes. You can make even less work for yourself by planning your chaos gardening around the rain, or better yet, chaos garden in the rain. If you've never gardened in the rain before, this is your sign. Do it. It's so fun. It's so freeing. Take a page out of Drew Barrymore's book and don't miss that opportunity. But if you'd rather not garden in the rain, Plan it for the day before a rain, and you want to make sure that it's not going to be like a flooding type of rain, because when you scatter seeds, you don't want them to move around too much. Try to plan it around a nice light rain, and what that's going to do is, water activates seeds pretty much and signals it to start germinating. So instead of you having to water, just let nature water it for you. There are a couple ways that you can scatter seeds when you're chaos gardening. The most simple way is just taking your hand, dumping some seeds in there, taking your other hand, picking them up, whatever move you want to come up with. And you can either leave those seeds alone as they are right after you sprinkle them, or you can take your hand and just kind of gently mix them into the soil. Totally up to you. Another thing that you can do is you can take an old herb shaker or bottle or something, preferably one that has like the larger holes at the top instead of the tiny ones in case you have some larger seeds. And you can create your own little seed concoction in there, or you can just do one type of seed. And that kind of just gives you more of an even distribution when you're scattering seeds. But personally, I prefer to just be a little garden gremlin out there. This last tip is an answer to a question that I always get when I talk about chaos gardening, and that is, do I need to go back and thin the seedlings once they start popping up? The answer is sometimes, and it just depends on the plant. So things that can be planted pretty densely together, like wildflowers, for instance, I don't really worry about going back and thinning those out. Lettuce can be planted very, very densely, so I never really thin out my lettuce. Chamomile, that's like one of my, my favorite things, is I love a good and densely planted chamomile patch. But if it is something that does require space and room to grow properly, like your root crops, carrots, for instance, they need to be thinned to be every 2 to 3 inches apart, or else they're just not going to grow the root, which is the carrot. It just depends on the plant. Now, here are 5 chaos recipes or planting combinations that are working well for me in my garden to give you a little bit of chaotic inspo. In this first bed, there's a lot of things going on here, but the main ingredients are peas, cabbage, and lettuce. I started planting out this bed by planting a ring of sugar snap peas in the middle, growing up this trellis, kind of like the statement piece of the bed. Then I chaos gardened some cabbage seeds in the front. I think a broccoli seed may have gotten mixed in there because I see a random broccoli. Cabbage seeds in the front of the bed because the front gets the most sun, because the sun rises this way and it's more shady back here. I also made sure to thin those out quite a bit because cabbages are very, very large. And then I went in and chaos gardened the rest of the spaces of this bed with lettuce. There's a bunch of lettuce in the front. There's a sea of lettuce back here. And then I got some like random flowers. There's some snapdragons here and snapdragons over there just to add like a pop of color to the bed. The ingredients for this chaos recipe are fava beans, radish, and carrot. With this bed, I planted out these fava beans and thinned them to every 8 to 10 inches or so. And then I kind of just chaos gardened in the gaps, the open spaces, with carrots and radish. And carrots and radish are really great to plant together because the quick growing radish only take like 3 weeks from seed to harvest, whereas carrots can take upwards of 3 weeks to even germinate. So when you plant them together, you can go ahead and harvest the radish and then just add in the fava beans on top of that, and you've got an amazing chaos planting combo. Over here, we've got one of my favorite chaos recipes that I've ever created, and that is asparagus, lettuce, and strawberries. This is my asparagus bed. As you can see, it's ferning out right now. It wasn't quite ready for me to harvest yet. It's only on its 2nd year. But I noticed there was a lot of extra space in this bed that wasn't being used. So of course my chaos gardening brain got to work. And again, lettuce is like my favorite go-to. I just sprinkled a bunch of lettuce in all of the spaces. And now there's just like this beautiful sea of lettuce, and I used a mix. So there's different colors, there's different textures. And then around the outside of the bed, I had a lot of extra strawberry runners because my strawberry beds were getting a little bit out of control. So I cut the runners off and planted them all around the outside. And I actually see a few berries forming. That's really cool. This is one of my favorite beds in my garden right now. I know I said that about every bed so far, but I'm serious. For this chaos recipe, we have strawberries, chives, and flowers. This is one of the only in-ground beds in my garden, and a few years ago, I chaos gardened some chive seeds right in front here, and I didn't really have a lot going on in the back. I had this beautiful clematis that was growing up this trellis, but there was a lot of space in the middle. And as I said, one of my strawberry patches is just like overwhelming and it had a ton of runners. And so I just cut off a bunch of runners from that patch and brought them over here, which is another form of chaos gardening. Chives and strawberries are like a match made in heaven because pests really don't like the smell of anything oniony. So onions or chives are excellent strawberry companion plants because they can ward off pests. This next chaos recipe, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a demonstration. This is a chaos recipe that appeals to a lot of people, and that is a wildflower mix. So as you can see, I have a beehive here. The bees aren't here yet. They're coming next weekend. But I have this empty space in my yard right around the beehive. And in my mind, I see an empty space and I'm just like, chaos gardening. I know this spot looks really shady, but it's not. It gets a lot of morning sun. It gets some late afternoon shade, but it's best to go with a native wildflower mix if you're gonna do this, just because we need more native plants, and also native wildflowers tend to do better because they are used to your native soil. Flower mixes are absolutely perfect to chaos garden with because you can just channel that little inner chaotic garden gremlin and just scatter the seeds everywhere. You don't really have to worry about thinning them. The seeds are really small, so it's perfect. You are helping the pollinators, you're adding beauty to your garden. It's just a win-win. If you still aren't quite sold on the idea of chaos gardening and you're thinking, no, I like things orderly, I like things neat, here are a few more reasons why you might just want to branch out a little bit and try it, because chaos gardening can actually help improve the overall health of your garden. As you've already seen in some of my chaos recipes, you can use chaos gardening to fill in every single empty space that you possibly have in your garden. And that's just making use of your space, but also all of those plants that are filling in the gaps can act as like a living mulch. These plants that act as a living mulch can also decrease your water usage because they're keeping the soil cool. They are helping it to not dry out as fast, so that just makes less work for you. We all know how detrimental monoculture can be to ecosystems, and with chaos gardening, you're actually increasing the biodiversity in your garden, which in turn is attracting beneficial insects to your garden, which are going to help you take care of pest pressures, so it just makes less work for you. Another form of chaos gardening and something that can be very beneficial to your garden is letting plants go to seed and saving those seeds, or just dispersing them or letting them disperse on their own and reseed themselves. This second generation of plants, also lovingly called volunteer plants, they're gonna just be so much stronger. Some of the best performing plants that I've ever had in my garden have been volunteer plants. I do want to add a little disclaimer about volunteer plants. Sometimes there's some hybridization that can go on when you are allowing volunteers to pop up in your garden, which is, kind of fun in itself, but I do want you to Google toxic squash syndrome and be very careful when you are letting volunteer squash pop up in your garden. Just to show you guys how productive chaos gardening can be, let's do a little chaos carrot harvest. I actually planted this little patch of carrots for an epic video back in the fall, so they've been growing all winter, and let's see how they did. Nice. That's a solid carrot. I don't really like the taste of dirt like Kevin and Jacques do, so I had to give this a little bit of a rinse, but let's do a taste test. You can't get any better than a freshly grown carrot. If you want to learn how to plant carrots in a less chaotic way, check out this video right here. Good luck in the garden and keep on growing.